Commanders Nation, we need to have a real, honest, uncomfortable conversation today because the center position on this offensive line has officially spiraled into full-blown chaos, and it's time somebody said the quiet part out loud. We're talking gaslighting accusations aimed directly at Dan Quinn, a deep dive into exactly what's really going on with Nick Allegretti's mysterious calf injury. Brutal advanced metrics exposing just how bad Julian Good-Jones has actually been, and a real look at whether rookie Matt Goldman is ready to be thrown into the fire against the Philadelphia Eagles in Week 1. So if you're new here, welcome to Commanders Focus. Hit that subscribe button right now. We're chasing 2,000 subscribers, and today's breakdown does not hold back. Let's get into it. Let's start with the timeline, because context matters enormously here. Back at the start of the offseason, when this roster was still at full strength, the center position was already widely identified as the single weakest link on this entire offensive line, maybe on this entire team. And then disaster struck up front, the starting center went down, the Pro Bowl left tackle tore his triceps. And suddenly this offensive line was scrambling, shuffling pieces all over the formation. And somehow, in the middle of all that chaos, this same center who was originally viewed as the biggest question mark on the roster got quietly repositioned in the public narrative as the guy who was supposed to be the savior holding this whole unit together. Let's not lose sight of where this actually started. He was the problem before he became the supposed solution. So here we are, deep into training camp, roughly a week away from roster cutdowns and about 2.5 weeks from the regular season opener, and this center situation remains a genuine mess. Now, to be fair, there's been some recent cleanup, some real attempts to sort through this, but that's not good enough. What's needed now is actual, tangible action, real progress on the trade or free agent market, not just more evaluation. Let's talk about Dan Quinn's press conference comments, because this is where things get genuinely uncomfortable. Quinn recently said the team hopes to get their veteran center back to practice sometime next week, not for tomorrow's joint practice. Not for the preseason finale, but next week, which functionally lands in that strange dead zone between the end of preseason and the true start of regular season prep. Think about what that actually means. This player has barely practiced at all throughout the entirety of training camp. We're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 total snaps. And now the hope is simply that he'll finally get back on the field for real. With roughly 2 weeks left before this team opens the season on the road against a genuinely difficult divisional opponent. That is not a reassuring sign. That is a red flag. And here's the uncomfortable part that needs to be said plainly. There's a real argument that this isn't simple tightness, as it's been described publicly. Anyone who's actually dealt with a real calf strain knows the treatment options: massage guns, heat, ice, foam rolling, electrical stimulation, dry needling. Simple tightness doesn't sideline a player for a week and a half or more. That kind of extended absence typically points to a real strain or re-aggravation of an existing injury. Not a minor cramp that seizes up occasionally. Nobody's claiming inside knowledge here. This is simply reading between the lines of the actual publicly available facts and the extended timeline involved. And here's the brutal reality of the situation, regardless of what's actually happening physically. Even in the best-case scenario where this veteran center clears every medical hurdle and gets back on the practice field almost immediately, he'd still have less than 2 weeks to prepare to face an elite, physically dominant Eagles defensive interior in the season opener. Would he even be in football shape at that point? Is a rusty veteran with almost zero training camp reps under his belt actually a better option than the 2 younger players who have at least been getting live practice work all camp long? That's a legitimately difficult question, and it's not a good sign that this organization is even stuck debating it this late in the process. Okay, quick pause here. If you're finding value in these deep, honest breakdowns, hit that subscribe button. We're chasing 2,000 subscribers on this channel, and every single one of you watching helps get us there. All right, Let's keep going because there's a lot more to unpack. So right now, functionally, the realistic center options on this roster are a career practice squad player with a grand total of 2 NFL snaps to his name and a 6th-round rookie who only played center full-time for a single season in college. That's genuinely the state of this position group heading into a season where this franchise is trying to legitimately contend. Now let's talk about Adam Peters for a second, because this criticism comes from a place of real respect for his overall process. Peters has generally operated with real intelligence and reasoning behind his decisions, drafting for high athletic upside, cleaning up the salary cap situation, making calculated trades even when they didn't always pan out. But this specific situation? This is a legitimate mistake. This front office was simply not adequately prepared for a center injury, especially one compounded by the unrelated but simultaneous loss of the starting left tackle. That combination created a genuine crisis at the worst possible time, and it didn't have to happen this way. And it's worth tracking exactly how Dan Quinn's public tone on this position has evolved over the past several months, because the shift is honestly pretty revealing. Back in late March, he described the center competition as wide open, by no means finalized. By mid-June at minicamp, he acknowledged the real battle would come once pads went on. The night before training camp opened in late July, there was talk of having a ton of confidence in the center options and expecting a great competition. By early August, after signing a couple more offensive linemen, the language shifted to wanting to raise up the competition level in that room. And then, just last week, after the preseason loss to Detroit, Quinn openly admitted the team has work to do to figure out where we want to go at center. That is a dramatic tonal shift over 5 months, and it tells you everything about how this organization's confidence in this position group has eroded in real time. And it's not hard to understand why once you actually look at the tape and the numbers. One of these center options has simply been bad, not in an exaggerated, dramatic way, just a plain factual assessment based on what's shown up on film. He's been getting beaten consistently, even against lesser competition that likely won't be playing professional football for much longer, according to advanced analytics grading. He currently sits as the 2nd worst graded player on this entire offensive roster, trailing only one other lineman, and that other lineman was actually just released from the team entirely. When the guy rated worse than you just got cut, and there's still a meaningful statistical gap between you and the next closest player. That's not a great place to be sitting heading into final roster evaluations. There was also a real head-scratcher of a coaching decision recently, when the rookie center option was pulled away from center reps and instead given extensive snaps at guard. Look, there's an understandable logic in wanting to test a young player's versatility. But when your center room is genuinely this thin and this desperate for answers, every single available rep needs to be spent evaluating these players at the actual position that matters most. The evaluation window on the struggling veteran option should have closed a long time ago. The tape made that determination clear well before it needed nearly this much runway to become obvious. The more encouraging recent development, though, is that this rookie has finally started getting real, consistent work with the first-team offense over the past couple of practices after previously being buried on the depth chart. And when you actually dig into his tape, there's real reason for measured optimism, even while tempering expectations. In his first career preseason action playing exclusively at center, he didn't allow a single pressure across 22 pass protection snaps. That's a genuinely strong debut. He showed real understanding of blitz pickup responsibilities and run game assignments, solid technique and base, and the ability to overcome some natural physical limitations. Shorter arms and below-average raw strength testing numbers through pure technique. There is a real athleticism concern worth flagging honestly, though. His testing numbers around explosiveness and lateral agility weren't especially strong, and that shows up on tape in specific moments, struggling to get out in space on certain blocking assignments. lacking the ideal burst needed for some of the more athletic concepts this new offensive scheme wants to run. But even accounting for those legitimate concerns, he remains clearly the better long-term option compared to the struggling veteran alternative. So here's the honest bottom line on all of this. Given the current roster as constructed, this rookie realistically has to be the Week 1 starter at center. There isn't a viable alternative sitting on this roster right now. But, and this is the critical part, starting a completely inexperienced 6th-round rookie center in his first career start on the road against one of the most physically dominant interior defensive line duos in the entire NFL is an enormous ask. That's not a knock on the player himself. That's simply realism about the situation this front office has allowed to develop. And that's exactly why the real pressure here needs to land squarely on Adam Peters. This has to be the moment he picks up the phone and adds legitimate outside reinforcement to this offensive line before the season begins. Running out this current starting group as currently constructed in a real, meaningful regular season opener would represent a genuine failure of preparation. If this front office truly wants to maximize this critical window with their young franchise quarterback, this cannot be the plan they settle on. The clock is ticking, and it's time for real, decisive action. So, Commanders fans, I want to know what you think. Should the front office be making outside calls to bring in center help before Week 1? Or do you trust this rookie to hold up against a brutal Eagles front seven right out of the gate? Drop your thoughts down in the comments, because this is exactly the kind of storyline that could define how this season starts. That's everything for today's breakdown, Commanders Nation. If you found this valuable, smash that like button, drop your take down in the comments, and if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. We are on a mission to reach 2,000 subscribers on this channel, and every single one of you watching has the power to help us get there. More roster news, more film breakdowns, more honest analysis all season long. So don't wait, subscribe now, and until next time, Commanders fans, hail to the Commanders.